Okay, so thanks guys for joining us on a Wednesday night. Today we're just going to go over kind of building positive meal times and a little bit about what we do at Bluebird and how we best support meal times throughout their day with us. So my name is Natalie and I'm a speech language pathologist at Bluebird. And my little co-host.
I'm Riley. I'm a licensed dietitian at Bluebird.
Okay, so a little bit of what to expect today. So we're going to go over a little bit about mealtime and snack time, how often and how much, some tips for the mealtime at home. We're going to go over the Ellen Satter division of responsibilities and also just kind of how important playing with food and how to make mealtime fun and some ideas and snacks for foods at Bluebird and also at home. So really just kind of focusing on building those strong foundations and kind of looking at bigger picture and really fostering a great positive relationship with food for the kids. So feel free to chat us questions throughout the presentation in the little chat. And then any questions that weren't answered throughout the presentation, we will touch base with those at the end.
Awesome. So I'll kind of kick us off. Just a little bit of background on nutrition. What does my child need? So this is kind of a loaded question when trying to figure out how many calories per day your child needs, how much of each food group your child needs. And there's lots of factors to consider. And these factors include things like age, sex, height, weight, activity level, and then any specific diets that your child follows, any allergies or intolerances. And if you have any specific concerns with caloric intake and making sure your child's getting enough each day, I definitely recommend kind of connecting with their pediatrician. But hopefully as we kind of go through the presentation, it'll ease your mind a little bit. Definitely kids' diets change on a day-to-day basis. How much they want to eat, what they want to eat, every day can look pretty different. But just in kind of general, there's some sample food group plans that I'll kind of run through. So there's one for, the first one is ages 2 to 3 years. And we'll send these slides out so you can kind of look into them a little bit more in depth and review them. But really the main focus that we want to be thinking about is just making sure we're kind of touching on all food groups. So focusing on those whole fruits, increasing those veggies or incorporating veggies in some way. With our grains, we want to think about whole grains. So whole grains contain things like fiber, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but that's really great for digestion. It helps our kiddos feel fuller longer as opposed to those refined grains that are found in a lot of our like white breads, white pastas, packaged snacks, snack foods, things like that. Focusing on getting in some protein, whether it be animal or plant-based protein, just kind of a variety of protein sources. And then dairy as well. If your child does not consume or cannot tolerate dairy, looking for kind of those fortified options to make sure you're incorporating that. And then also at the bottom here, it just in each of the kind of age groups, it talks about sugar, saturated fat, and sodium, which are one of those three kind of components we want to look at limiting. And so things like added sugars, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides, are things we want to try to limit or keep to a kind of a smaller quantity, saturated fats, as well as sodium, which is salt. So this is the sample food group plan for 2 to 3 years of age. There's one in the slides for 4 to 8, and then 9 to 13 as well. And really each of these incorporate all of those 5 food groups. They touch on exercise. We're also going to touch on hydration, so drinking water, which is really important, and then kind of limiting those 3 things I discussed. But like I said, just really focusing on those whole fruits, veggies, protein, whole grains, and dairy or fortified products if possible.
And then just a little bit on hydration, kind of similar to obviously like what does the child need? That is very dependent on the height, weight, their age, their activity level. So we put some numbers together just on average, like kids between 1 to 3 need around 4 cups per day of water, kids 4 to 8, about 5 to 6 cups, and then kids ages 9 to 13, about 5 to 6 cups a day. So we love to encourage, especially at Bluebird, just hydration throughout the day between meals, during snack times. As far as juice is concerned, we like to just be mindful of the added sugar that's going in, and just, we always like to either feed them a little something prior to their access to fruit, but just being really mindful of those added sugars.
And when I was kind of touching on whole grains, I briefly mentioned fiber. So fiber is another important nutrient we want to think about. It helps us, like I said, feel fuller longer. It helps keep things moving in the digestive tract, so it can help prevent constipation. And it's important for kids and adults alike. So again, this kind of depends how much on height, weight, age, and sex, but an average kid needs about 25 grams of fiber per day. And our fiber-rich foods include things like whole grains, fruits with those peels on them. So the peel on an apple contains a good amount of fiber. Our veggies are a good source of fiber, beans and avocados as well. And one thing I'd just like to mention is our Bluebird lunches at school always contain those kind of 5 food groups. So we always try to expose or encourage kiddos to consume those throughout the day when they're at lunch. So that catered lunch always has those 5 food groups, which is really great. And the last thing I like to dive into a little bit further is just sugar. And so there's added sugar and there's naturally occurring sugar. So naturally occurring sugar is found in a lot of our foods that we consider to be a part of an overall healthy diet. So things like fruit, dairy products contain natural sugars. Added sugars are those that are kind of added to foods. So if you look at the new nutrition labels, they actually now break up total sugar versus added sugar. So for example, in this specific food, there's 25 grams of total sugar, 23 grams of added sugar. So we know that there's 2 grams of naturally occurring sugar. So that naturally occurring sugar, again, is going to be found in a lot of our fruit and our dairy products. So that's not necessarily what we want to look out for. It's more those added sugars. And added sugar is found in a lot of our kind of packaged and processed snack foods and desserts. It can be added to juices, things like soda, if our kids are consuming those. And then also in foods like condiments. So things like ketchup, barbecue sauce can tend to have kind of high amounts of added sugar. So just looking out and being mindful of kind of that added sugar consumption throughout the day.
And then just a little bit of background on eating now that we kind of went through all those food groups. So around 4 to 6 months, that's when eating becomes a learned behavior. So some tips for creating those healthy mealtime behaviors from that age, just social modeling. We love to sit down and eat. Especially at Bluebird, we've noticed a big change in some of the kids when we sit down and have a meal and they're just kind of watching us and they're like, hey, kind of building that trust that, hey, they're eating it, I can eat it too. And we always are very descriptive with how it smells, how it feels, how it tastes, and even how it sounds. So just really being super descriptive, trying to make it fun. We love just playing make-believe, making, smiley faces out of broccoli or rocket ships out of, brown rice. So really involving the child in all parts of the meal, helping them scoop it on their plate, making it seem just really no big deal. Oops, you touched an onion, you're just kind of being really impartial. So between 5 to 7 years, it kind of shifts to that more logical thinking, and we can see a little more of those food jags. So a food jag is sometimes when a child or even adults, honestly, can just drop a meal after a certain point of that exposure, and they're like, oh wow, I just really don't really like this anymore. I don't think I like it anymore. And that's totally normal, even as adults. But that's something, those 5 to 7 years, that we tend to notice.
And just some other tips we have. So kids do really well when they eat frequently and they eat consistently. So we recommend on average kids have about 3 meals and then 2 to 3 snacks per day, allowing about 2.5 to 3 hours between that meal and that snack time. And we wait that kind of time in between, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. It allows those hunger cues to kick in. And it can help kids be more exploratory during lunch and snack time, kind of trying out new things. So when kids are kind of grazing all day long, it can interfere with their appetite and disrupt their kind of natural instinct to experience hunger and fullness. So when we're kind of timing it out, kids know, oh, I'm going to get a meal and then a snack and then a meal and a snack. And that is kind of how we structure it at Bluebird too. They have mealtime or lunchtime, and then they get a snack during oral motor speech rotations. And so just kind of offering those and kind of spacing them out throughout the day. And then we also recommend just using the same table or surface for meals and snacks if possible. So if you have a table or a countertop or a coffee table, somewhere where you like to kind of have meal and snack time, just keeping that consistent each day is really helpful for kiddos as well. Again, kind of what we touched on before, presenting a protein, a starch, a fruit and a veggie when possible at meals. And then definitely, you know, if your kiddos have preferred foods, you can make 2 meals. So if you're having one thing for dinner and maybe your child likes something specific for dinner, having that preferred food that they like, but then also kind of putting a few of those non-preferred food things on their plate as well. Just continuing that exposure, whether it's just visual exposure, maybe they accidentally kind of touch it or they'll poke it with their fork, or they'll see you eating it and kind of modeling that, and they may tend to explore it a little bit more. So just always kind of still continuing to expose them to those foods, whether even if it is just visually, it's really good. We also like to encourage just limiting meal and snack time to about 15 minutes and meal time to about 30 minutes, just to kind of keep it consistent, and they know kind of that's the time they have to eat. And then this one's definitely more tricky, but trying to not offer the same kind of really highly preferred foods more than 1 to 2 times per day, just to kind of help with that food jagging and kind of hopefully try to limit how many foods they kind of drop or, you know, get burnt out on a little bit, which obviously that one's a little bit more difficult, but kind of trying to only offer it a couple times throughout the day, and alongside those non-preferreds with it. So this is a nice visual for just that kind of meal and snack time schedule I touched on. So just allowing that time for them to grow, learn, rest, and play between those meal and snacks to, again, kind of help encourage that natural instinct of hunger and fullness. It can help encourage that exposure and exploratory process during meal and snack time. And then offering it consistently, it can help prevent kids from refusing foods at a meal and then kind of asking for a snack just as the meal ends. So just kind of offering those preferred and non-preferred together.
And then just a little bit more, there's so many layers to feeding. So we kind of think of feeding as an iceberg. So we have feeding on the tip top, and then beneath it all, we have like all our organs, all our muscles, all our senses, like how we learn, the style, capacity, like our history of like interacting with food, our development, our nutritional status and environment, which I always just love to give the example of, you know, when I was a kid, mushrooms, like I could not even touch mushrooms. I was like, they're so gross, but kind of as you get older and you develop, now I love mushrooms. So feeding really is, I feel like, a long journey of like, you know, like I said in the beginning, kind of the bigger picture of it. And really all these things kind of play a role in what we eat on a day-to-day basis. So just kind of keeping this in mind that, you know, if someone, it can be a little pickier, you know, they might have something else going on beneath it. So a lot of times it's what you see, but there's a lot of underlying things that can impact how we eat.
And I always like to touch on the Ellen Satter division of responsibilities. So Ellen is a dietitian, a family therapist, a trainer, and a consultant who kind of created this competence and like feeding dynamic model. And it's kind of the framework for feeding. And this kind of breaks up the responsibilities when it comes to feeding. So as an adult, you're responsible for what, when, and where. And as a child, your child is responsible for how much and whether. So we'll dive into this a little bit more, but, in terms of the what, when, and where, you're choosing and preparing the foods, providing that scheduled meal and snack time, providing that safe mealtime environment, and modeling that good behavior. Being considerate, so offering those preferred foods without catering to everything, and then encouraging water between meals and snacks. And then kiddos are responsible for eating the amount they need, watching their adult eat, and learning good behavior. And to just kind of dive into those a little bit more. So again, we've kind of touched on this a couple times, but pairing that new food alongside the preferred foods on the same plate, kind of exposing them all at once. Offering those new foods in smaller quantities. Sometimes it can be kind of overwhelming, whether it be smell, visually, texturally. So kind of offering it in just those small quantities can be really helpful when exposing kiddos to new foods. Again, trying not to offer that same very highly preferred foods more than 1 to 2 times per day. Food chaining. So this is something that we really love to do here at Bluebird too. And feeding therapy is kind of chaining off of preferred food. So for example, if a highly preferred food is a Cheeto, trying different flavors of Cheetos or different brands, and then, sticking with that kind of like dry, crunchy texture, and then kind of building from there. So as a next step, it could be like a plain puff with no cheese on it, and then kind of chaining into something like a carrot would be kind of probably that last step with that food chain. So just kind of, chaining off those preferred textures and flavors. And then Natalie's going to dive into the steps to eating a little bit further, but there's so many steps to eating. So just kind of remembering that feeding is a very slow process. And there's a lot of little steps that take us from even just visually tolerating to touching, to smelling, exploring, and putting it in our mouth. And then when. So again, trying to encourage those 3 meals, 2 snacks per day, try to limit the grazing throughout the day, and then always obviously offering water between meals to keep our kiddos hydrated. And then where. So I kind of touched on this a little bit, but trying to eat alongside of our child, eat kind of those same foods that they're eating, modeling that good behavior, providing that good company, and then kind of avoiding screen time if possible. I always like to provide the example, mindless eating. So I'm guilty of this. If I, grab a snack food from the pantry and I'm watching TV or something like that, I'll just kind of mindlessly eat. And I could tend to overeat, or I could completely forget that I was eating in the first place. So when we have those screens in front of us, a lot of times it kind of distracts us from what's in front of us. And when we're just kind of focusing on that food, both us as adults and kiddos can mindfully eat more. So, really paying attention to those tastes, textures, flavors, the sounds the food makes when you crunch them, things like that, kind of talking about them, and making it a really, really positive experience. And then, table height, making sure the table and the chair height are good for kiddos. And if you have any questions about this, definitely consulting with their OT and our PT team. They can definitely kind of help with table height, chair assistance. And then we always like to encourage adding like fun placemats is something we like to do here at Bluebird. So they really like the ABCs, having an ABC placemat to kind of play with food on. A lot of our kids like to look at themselves in the mirror when they eat. So offering like mirrors too, or any kind of like sensory toys that may be helpful to kind of promote that positive mealtime. And then our kiddos are responsible for whether they eat or not and how much. So if possible, letting kiddos serve themselves meals. So kind of scooping it out of the bowl if that's a skill that they have, or, saying, do you want 4 carrots or 3 carrots? Things like that. Trying to encourage them to help build that plate. Encourage that exploration. We're going to talk about some play-based ideas at the end here. And then how much. So just remembering that our kiddos' appetites can fluctuate, and allowing them to have seconds or thirds, even if it's maybe something they haven't even eaten before. Again, trying to limit those desserts/sweets, but allowing them to have seconds and thirds of dinner. And then the goal really of feeding is just trusting your child to eat. So we want to preserve a child's sensation of hunger, appetite, and satiety. So just really trusting that those instincts will kick in and they'll eat those foods.
And then now we're getting in a little more to the steps of eating, and there's a lot of steps. So I'm just kind of going to summarize, like Riley said, we'll be sharing this presentation so you could read it a little further, but something that we like to do at Bluebird is follow these steps to eating. So we have like tolerating, like can they tolerate sitting next to a non-preferred food? And then next would be like interacting with, like whether they like are touching it or they're like, oh, look, like it's a green bean. The next step would be smelling it, even just being able to tolerate the smell in the room. You know, we have some foods that can be a little more potent than others. So being able to tolerate that either in the room or at the table, and really just acknowledging the kiddo if you kind of see some discomfort of like them not being able to tolerate at the table, just maybe just, okay, like let's keep it that food in the kitchen. Kind of taking a step back. So we have tolerating, interacting with the food, smelling the food, and then the next step would be to touch the food. So even if it's one fingertip, if it's a whole hand, and sometimes if that whole hand is too much, or really if any step, like just taking a step back. If it's the whole hand, like, okay, let's do one fingertip. And then the next step would be tasting. So tasting, we start from like just having it lick our lips or even our teeth, like the tongue tip, then moving on to like a full lick and then taking bites or spitting it out immediately. So really just take into account all these little steps that kind of, again, foster like a healthy relationship with the food and kind of promote that intrinsic motivation. And so lastly, that would be eating, taking bites, chewing, swallowing, maybe spitting some out, or finally chewing, swallowing the whole food item independently, which is our ultimate goal, is really just promoting that independence and, like I said, just increasing that motivation for them. And anytime that we see like our kiddos sometimes have a hard time, you know, we'll scale it back to see, you know, maybe one day they're just really not tolerating anything and we'll just place the plate in front of them. But, you know, they're telling us like, hey, it's okay that it's in front of me. So just kind of respecting that today, that's all we're going to do. And then a little bit about being distressed, kind of like what I was touching on. Sometimes we see kiddos that have issues with their adrenal. So maybe their GI kind of tract is a little wonky and it kind of shuts down, or their shifts like people into like react mode versus learning mode. Sometimes they kind of are just a little stressed out. So they just have to take a second and calm down. Those that they're a little less than 3 years old. So because of their cognitive development, children under the age of 3, they have that primitive stress response versus making a mental decision to avoid eating. And then at 3, they can kind of start to worry about what will happen in the future at a basic level. So like that what if, so kind of like that fight or flight, or like, no, like you'll kind of get the head shaking, the like, no, thank you, or like a little knee jerk. And then at ages 4 and 5, sometimes that's when we see like ignoring of food completely, or just saying they're full, no, thank you, or it's yucky. They're kind of, sometimes at this age, we see like a little more anticipatory anxiety of just like, this food is really making me feel uncomfortable. So really just trusting like their understanding, kind of problem solving what is missing, kind of putting the pieces together. And sometimes, like Riley said, it does take time just to kind of feel them out and see what is causing this. And like we said, the team is always willing and happy to problem solve with you all. And then vision over responses. So this is when the kiddo can avoid eye contact. They may look away. So if they're like, oh, if you want to try like the sloppy Joe, and they're like closing their eyes. So that's them telling you like, no, I don't want to. So even if they're not verbally saying it, we're kind of respecting, oh, this is how they're reacting. they're not quite there yet, or a smell over response where their eyes are watering, or they're turning their head away, or just make a funny face. So really kind of taking those like nonverbal cues and like respecting that, like, hey, maybe their body's like not ready to be exposed to this. And then again, that same thing goes for like the tactile over responses, like touching, frequently wiping their hands. Taste over responding, that's more of a delayed response. So you'll see gagging or sometimes vomiting to taste, or just like shudder, like a little shudder, or like grimacing their lips. Auditory, repeated eye blinking, or like startling to noises, and avoiding like higher crunchy foods, or covering their ears when they're eating. And then their vestibular over responses is that when they're startled, when the chair's pushed up to the table, they're like immediately kind of back away, or they avoid drinking from an open cup. They may also like hold their breath when they're drinking. I know there's a lot of different food distress, but like we said, we'll be sharing this and you can look at it further, but the eating is really the most difficult sensory tasks children do. So we believe if the child is having a stress response, they're having it because they can't manage that task. So we will teach the skills like in a manner that's, like we said, respects the child's readiness to the task. So really just meeting them where they're at and kind of building from there.
What color? What are you doing? You're making up 2 excuses. What color, Carter?
And then, so for our
We got
bluebird,
to pull in poop.
sorry, Riley, are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then again, just kind of touching on the iceberg again. So again, the responsibilities may change depending on engagement and developmental level at the table, but just remembering that there's so many underlying factors that kind of contribute to feeding and our response at the table and during mealtime. Yeah. So,
Sorry, go ahead,
no, you're fine. So making mealtime fun. So we like to have fun during meal and snack time at Bluebird, and during our sessions. So just some ideas of things we like to do either during lunchtime or during our individual sessions. So using cookie cutters to kind of cut foods into fun shapes. So if kids really like animals, cutting them into animals, letters, shapes, whatever kind of piques their interest. So like if it's a zucchini, cutting the zucchini into a flower, and it's kind of just that middle part. So just making it really fun with those. Painting with different sauces. So whether it be, you know, pasta sauce, the cheese sauce from the mac and cheese, if it's like chili that day. So just like painting with the different sauces. We always like to talk about the food as we eat it. So, oh, this food is crunchy. This food is soft. This food is sweet, salty. Kind of talking about our feelings. Oh, we really like this food. This food is yummy. This food makes me feel happy. And then some other things that, you know, we don't obviously do here at Bluebird, but things that can make mealtime fun at home is just having kiddos help with grocery shopping. So bringing them to the grocery store, exposing them to those different foods, you know, there's so many different like fruits and veggies and things that kids can kind of look at. Maybe they pick some things out that they think look good, or you can talk about what you're going to make for dinner and kind of picking out the ingredients for that. You know, mixing bowls, so like stirring foods together, helping plate the food themselves if that's a skill they have. So just kind of really involving them in kind of all those steps can definitely just continue that exposure and, you know, make mealtime more fun.
Yeah. And then even I think Riley, I think a big one that's really big at Bluebird right now is just taking something that a child may like and kind of like, oh, like, do you want to go play cars? And our pineapple is now like a little car that ran over a bridge that's a green bean. So really making that like make believe of like not letting them forget that it's food, but kind of realize like it's really like you're okay, like you're safe with this food. You don't have to eat there. It kind of drops that pressure of like I have to eat this food, which has been fun to see, just having them explore in that way too. so that kind of wraps up. You know, we went a little quick, but we just wanted to open it up to questions. If anyone has any, they could put them in the chat. We'll give it a few minutes, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to either reach out to your specific discipline and your teams, or just send us a quick message. We're always available.
I have a question. I'm driving, so my camera's off, but what about a kiddo who like primarily just bottle feeds for nutrition? And he will eat like some foods, but should you still offer like the bottle with the meal, or is it okay to use it as like an award, like a more of like a reward, like first we're gonna, and not say like first you have to eat this and then you can have the bottle, but just like not offering it until the end of the meal? Or what do you recommend for that?
Yeah, I feel like for bottle feeds, one of the first things we ask is kind of like the age. And so how old is this friend?
5.
Okay. So I know, and Riley, we could tag team this. For bottle feeds, usually we try, if that's like very preferred, we try to find something, either like a different kind of like water bottle or cup, to like first kind of wean that out. But in the meantime, kind of incorporating it, I would say, and Riley, you could join in if you think otherwise. Sometimes, hold on, let me think about this one.
Yeah, take your time.
I think it would be helpful to offer it kind of in conjunction with the meal. So even if those kind of foods on the plate.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine. I was just gonna say maybe in conjunction with the meal. So even if those foods on the plate are just really in that exploratory phase. So again, kind of making them fun, like driving around as little cars or kind of whatever this friend specific interests are, kind of playing with the food and really just continuing to expose, but then having that preferred food alongside it. So I always recommend serving it in conjunction. Sometimes when we serve it second after a meal, it can sometimes, our kiddos will just, you know, explore it really quickly and do what like they think they need to do so that they can get that other thing. So sometimes when you offer it in conjunction, it elongates that exploration and kind of sparks that curiosity for a little bit longer. But Natalie, feel free to add anything.
No, yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Kind of in conjunction too, and then at the same time, like starting, like you can offer different cups too, like during, like the bottle can still be there, but just offering different cups, like kind of using it the same way as the exposure of different food, also like exposing them to different cups and different ways to drink it.
That idea. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate the input.
Of course.
Of course. Fun straws can be good too. I know a lot of our kiddos like the swirly straws, or even straws with like animals on them or things like that can be fun.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I'm a school-based occupational therapist, and one of my students that are on the spectrum, I observed them today during lunchtime, and they do tend to, turns out it's a daily thing, they tend to take their hot lunch that is in a box, and they tend to get up and put it completely far away at another table. Would you suggest trying to explore different locations to put their their lunch maybe a little bit farther away from them, but on the same table?
Yeah, I think that would be a great place to start. And maybe even sometimes like offering a different plate, like putting the plate. I know sometimes those hot lunches, there could be a lot of food on them. So kind of minimizing how much food and maybe bringing an extra plate of the food and just putting it a little further, but like less amount might be a good next step.
Okay, great. And then I have actually noticed that for their cold lunches, because I suggested maybe putting out the hot lunch for them on a daily basis, even if they've brought a cold lunch. I've noticed that typically their lunches that are brought from home are like Oreos or like fruit snacks, and that's kind of it. Do you have any suggestions on how to communicate with the parents regarding their food choices?
Yeah, I can kind of start, and Natalie, feel free to jump in. But definitely maybe just kind of asking them to send in, just a couple more options for exploration. So even if it's as simple as kind of sending in leftovers from the night before to kind of offer in conjunction with that lunch. Maybe bringing in like a whole piece of fruit, like starting really small, just by incorporating kind of one of those other 5 food groups that we kind of talked about. So a whole piece of fruit, maybe a side of veggies, a piece of bread, things like that to just, kind of continue that exposure and kind of discuss it as, we want to try to get in nutrients from all 5 of these food groups. Could you send in some options to help us kind of explore things a little bit further? And again, whether it just be one of them or leftovers from dinner to kind of continue that exposure, just, making it as simple as possible for parents to send that in too. But just, really trying to, again, just expose them to all 5 of those food groups.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Natalie, we got a chat. It says, can you talk about strategies for increasing spoon or fork use so that parents don't have to feed the child or are not feeding the child?
So I would definitely say start, and OTs have done a good job of teaching us more about utensil use. So I would definitely say exposing them just like with their hands first is usually how we start prior to using utensils. So I would say if they're not using their hands quite yet, kind of like modeling that for them and then kind of going from there. And there's also like different utensils that you could use to help support that. But I would say just having them explore through touch as the first step to like self-feeding.
Hi, I have another question.
Yeah.
I actually have another example of someone who has requested specific foods that are not in the cafeteria, for example, like a sandwich, and they want a specific sandwich. Have you had any strategies or luck with maybe um, encouraging eating other foods, even though they want a specific one?
Yeah, I would add, is that specific like sandwich always accessible to them? Or
I think no, just because they have different foods provided by the school's food company
okay.
Every day.
So are they consistently not eating their lunch? Or they just always asking for that sandwich?
So if it is, for example, like a cheeseburger or a hamburger, they will eat it that day. But on other days when they don't have that specific food item, they tend to not eat their lunch. However, they do depend on snack time later in the day. It's just that they'll be hungry throughout the day.
Got it. Okay. I would definitely say just continue. Again, I know we say we sound like a broken record, but that exposure too. And if they're, just places like, you don't have to eat it, like it's, you don't have to eat. We definitely have those friends that don't always love to eat. But I've noticed in our sessions that what's helped is to place a preferred food. So whether that's like contacting parents, like, hey, we've noticed that on certain days, like he really doesn't eat lunch. So to kind of promote some sort of eating and kind of get that schedule, kind of support that schedule of like, we eat during lunch, of sending in a snack that could be offered just specifically at lunch and kind of serving it in conjunction with the hot lunch.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question in the chat, how to avoid eating candy. I definitely think this is a tricky one. Our kiddos tend to like sweet foods typically. So I would say, kind of just maybe offering it at a specific time each day. So maybe it's like an after dinner treat, or kind of just, like offering it at one specific time each day. And, it's unavailable at other times of day, but except for that after dinner or after lunch kind of treat. And then for sodas, such as Coke, I would definitely kind of start by, kind of weaning off. So again, only offering it maybe at one specific meal. If it's very highly preferred, kind of cutting maybe the portion in half. With juices, we always say to kind of dilute with water. I think that would really alter the taste of soda. That's another idea too, or offering kind of half that portion at times, putting it in a separate cup. So it's not maybe in the bottle or the can. So it's kind of in a separate cup. Natalie, any other ideas for either?
Yeah, and sometimes like if it's a smaller cup, but if it's like all the way full, they'll think they'll like getting a lot. But it's just a smaller amount with a fuller cup. That kind of sometimes works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because sometimes they're fully satisfied even before they feel like they just have to finish it because the whole can is accessible to them. So kind of just monitoring that accessibility, I think is super helpful. Did another one pop up, Riley, or is that just for those?
The only one so far. Another question is, and maybe you have tips for this in terms of cups, Natalie. My 6-year-old is still drinking juice from a bottle.
So yeah, absolutely. We always love to recommend either some straw drinking, and we love this. It's called the Honey Bear. I'm pretty sure you could order it on Amazon. So it's a fun little cup that kind of helps expose you to that straw drinking. And like Riley said earlier, fun straws always make it something exciting and something different. So kind of playing around with different drinking, I would say go the straw route at first, and then trying an open cup as well, and kind of maybe modeling what they're drinking. Like you said, it was orange juice, Riley?
Just juice.
Just juice.
They tried sippy cups with straws.
Oh, they have. Okay. I would start then maybe an open cup and kind of modeling it and making it like a special time that you guys can have like a juice time together, and it's like a special cup, and it's like maybe a little mug or a little mug with like a cool straw. So kind of enticing them in that way.
And I like the Honey Bear cup too.
Yeah.
Well, if there's no more questions, we could wrap it up. What do you think, Riley and Natalie?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any more questions? Well, thanks everyone for joining us. We appreciate your time. And certainly if you have any questions, we will be sending out the recording once it's done to put it on YouTube. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you. Thanks, Natalie and Riley.
Thank you. Thanks everyone who joined.